Every afternoon at exactly 3:47 p.m., a man arrived at Riverside Park in Portland, Oregon, with his golden retriever. Same bench. Same time. Same routine. For weeks, nobody thought much of it. Just another dog owner enjoying the autumn air, right? But then parents started noticing something disturbing. He wasn't just sitting there. He was watching. And not randomly watching. He was tracking specific children. Always the same ones. His eyes followed them across the playground, and in his hands, a leather journal where he scribbled notes. When concerned mothers finally confronted him, demanding to know what he was hiding, what they discovered left every single person speechless and in tears. This is that story. But before I reveal what this man was really doing at that park, I need to know something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Are you in the United States, the UK, India, the Philippines, somewhere else? Drop your country or city in the comments below because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And listen, if you believe that true stories like this one, stories that remind us what really matters in this world, deserve to be heard, then I'm asking you to do 3 things right now while you're thinking about it. First, hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it tells YouTube to share this with more people who need to hear it. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I bring you stories like this every single day, stories that will restore your faith in humanity when you need it most. And third, share this video with at least one person today, your mom, your best friend, someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why I'm asking. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to a park in Portland where something extraordinary was happening right under everyone's noses. Riverside Park sat nestled in the heart of Portland's southeast side, where the Willamette River curved gently past neighborhoods of craftsman homes and tree-lined streets. On any given afternoon, the park hummed with life. Children's laughter echoed from the playground, where swings creaked rhythmically and slides gleamed in the autumn sun. Joggers navigated the paved loop trail, their breath forming small clouds in the cooling October air. Basketball courts rang with the percussion of bouncing balls and sneakers squeaking against asphalt. Dog walkers congregated near the off-leash area, their pets darting between trees and wrestling in piles of freshly fallen leaves. The smell of coffee drifted from a nearby cart, mixing with the earthy scent of maple and oak trees preparing for winter. Through it all, James Mitchell moved with quiet purpose. He was the kind of man people's eyes would slide past without truly seeing. Average height, maybe mid-40s, with graying hair that needed a trim and a weathered face that suggested he'd forgotten how to sleep properly. He wore the same faded navy jacket every single day, the kind with deep pockets and worn elbows that had clearly seen years of use. A slight limp affected his right leg, giving his walk an uneven rhythm that somehow matched the melancholy that seemed to emanate from him like a fog. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes even on overcast days, hiding whatever emotions might betray what he was thinking. But it wasn't James that people noticed. It was Cooper. The golden retriever walked beside him with the kind of perfect discipline that spoke of extensive training. No leash was needed. Cooper matched James's pace exactly, sitting immediately when James stopped, his intelligent brown eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with an alertness that seemed almost human. His coat gleamed like spun gold in the afternoon light, and there was something about the way he carried himself, a gentleness mixed with purpose, that made even strangers smile when he passed. Every day, the routine was identical. James and Cooper would enter through the east gate at exactly 3:47 p.m. Not 3:45. Not 3:50. Exactly 3:47. They would walk the same path along the river, past the basketball courts, around the perimeter of the playground, and then settle on the same weathered wooden bench overlooking the play area. The bench itself was unremarkable, just one of a dozen scattered throughout the park, with peeling green paint and the initials of long-ago teenagers carved into its slats. But something about this particular bench, this particular angle, this particular view of the playground, was important to James Mitchell. And then he would watch. At first, the regular parkgoers didn't think anything of it. People sat on benches all the time. Parents watched their kids play. Dog owners took breaks. Nothing unusual about that. But James Mitchell didn't have any children on that playground. At least, none that anyone had ever seen run up to him calling Dad, or beg him to push them on the swings. He simply sat, those dark glasses aimed toward the play area, occasionally pulling out a worn leather journal from his jacket pocket and writing something down. Cooper would sit perfectly still beside him, never wandering, never pulling toward other dogs, just watching whatever James was watching. It was Sarah Chun who first noticed the pattern. Sarah was a third-grade teacher at Bridgeport Elementary, just 6 blocks from the park, and she jogged through Riverside every afternoon around 4 o'clock, her daily ritual for maintaining both her physical health and mental sanity after long days with 8-year-olds. She had a teacher's eye for detail, that professional skill of noticing when something was off, when a pattern emerged, when behavior didn't quite fit the norm. The first time she saw James, she thought nothing of it. Just another person enjoying the park. The second time, she recognized the same jacket, the same golden retriever. By the 5th time seeing him in the exact same spot, she began to pay attention. And that's when she noticed his eyes weren't wandering randomly across the playground. They were focused. Tracking. Following specific children. There was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with blonde hair pulled into pigtails, who came to the park almost every day with her grandmother. While other children climbed and ran and played tag, this girl, Sarah had heard her grandmother call her Mia, would head straight for the swings and just sit there, sometimes for an hour, barely moving, lost in her own world. James watched her. Not in a casual glancing way, but with focused attention. When Mia moved from the swings to the sandbox, James's head would turn to follow. When she sat on the grass picking dandelions, he watched. And he wrote things in that journal. Then there was the boy, maybe 9 years old, with red hair and freckles scattered across his nose like constellations. Tyler, his mother called him when she dropped him off after school. Tyler would attempt the jungle gym over and over, struggling with the coordination needed to swing from bar to bar while other kids zipped past him effortlessly. He'd fall, get up, try again, fall again. Each failure seemed to isolate him further as the other children stopped noticing his efforts entirely. And James watched him too. Watched every attempt, every failure, every moment Tyler sat alone on the bottom rung looking defeated. More notes in the journal. Sarah started varying her jogging time, coming at different hours to see if the pattern held. It did. 3:47 p.m. Every single day. Same bench. Same intense focus on these specific children. She told herself she was being paranoid. Teachers were trained to spot concerning behavior. Maybe she was being oversensitive. But then she noticed Emma Rodriguez had started watching too. Emma was a nurse at Portland General Hospital, working the morning shift so she could pick up her daughter Lily from school every afternoon. Lily was 8 years old, with dark curly hair and eyes that seemed too serious for a child. For the past 6 months, since Emma's divorce had been finalized, Lily had become increasingly withdrawn. The vibrant, chatty little girl who used to narrate every thought had retreated into silence. At the park, Lily would sit on the bench beside her mother, staring at the other children playing but never joining them. Never asking to. Just watching like she was separated from them by invisible glass. 3 weeks ago, Emma had noticed the man with the golden retriever. He sat 2 benches down from where she and Lily usually settled. At first, Emma appreciated that he kept his distance, that he seemed to understand the unspoken social contract of public spaces. But then she realized his attention wasn't on his dog or his phone or a book. He was watching the playground. And sometimes, she could swear he was watching Lily. The thought made her skin crawl. She pulled Lily closer, considered changing parks entirely. But this was their park, their routine, their safe space. Why should they be the ones to leave? So she started watching him instead. And that's when she saw the journal. Saw him write something down after looking in Lily's direction. Saw him take out his phone and appear to photograph the playground. That was enough. Emma wasn't the type to stay silent when her maternal instincts screamed danger. She mentioned it to another mother, Rachel, who had a son around the same age. Rachel had noticed him too. So had Marcus Thompson, a father who brought his twin daughters to the park every Tuesday and Thursday. The whispers started spreading through the community of regular parkgoers like ripples in water. Have you seen that man who's always here? The one with the golden retriever? He's here every single day, same time. Just sitting. Watching. Watching the kids. I saw him writing about them in some kind of notebook. Should we call someone? Call who? The police? He's not technically doing anything illegal. But it's weird, right? It's definitely weird. The concerned glances multiplied. Parents started positioning themselves between James and their children. Some stopped coming to the park altogether. Others came specifically to monitor him, to gather evidence, to figure out what exactly was happening before they escalated to authorities. Marcus Thompson was a veteran Marine Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to Portland to start a family. He had protective instincts honed by years of assessing threats, and everything about James Mitchell's behavior patterns set off alarm bells. Marcus started documenting too, taking photos of James, noting the times, the behaviors, building a case. He convinced himself he was being rational, cautious, responsible. But deep down, anger simmered. If this guy was what Marcus suspected, if he was preying on vulnerable children in some way, Marcus wasn't sure he'd wait for the police to handle it. It all came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. The kind of day where autumn couldn't decide if it wanted to be beautiful or bleak, so it chose both. Brilliant blue sky streaked with gray clouds, warm sun interrupted by cold wind, leaves swirling in confused patterns across the grass. James arrived at 3:47 p.m., as always. Cooper walked beside him, as always. They took their usual path to their usual bench. And as James settled into his familiar position, pulling out his journal, he didn't notice the group of parents who had been waiting for him. Sarah had convinced Emma that today was the day they needed answers. Marcus had agreed to be there for backup. Rachel brought her phone, ready to call 911 if needed. 2 other parents whose names James had never learned joined them, forming a small coalition of concerned citizens who had decided that silence was no longer an option. Emma took the lead, her nurse's courage overriding her fear. She walked straight toward James, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Sarah flanked her right side. Marcus, arms crossed and jaw set, positioned himself on the left. James looked up from his journal to see them approaching, and something flickered across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like resignation. Like he'd been expecting this. Like he'd known this moment would eventually come. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound authoritative. "I need to know what you're doing here." Cooper's ears perked up at the tension in her voice, but the dog remained seated, calm, watching the interaction with those impossibly intelligent eyes. James carefully closed his journal, his hands moving slowly, deliberately. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "Don't play dumb," Marcus cut in, his voice harder than Emma's. "We've all been watching you watch our kids. Every day. Same time. Same spot. Writing about them. Taking pictures. So I'm going to ask you one time, nice and clear, what the hell are you doing at this park?" Other parents had stopped what they were doing. The playground seemed to quiet. Even some of the children paused their games, sensing the adult tension crackling through the air. James removed his sunglasses slowly, and for the first time, the group saw his eyes. They were blue-gray, like winter sky, and filled with something that surprised them. Not guilt. Not fear. Just a deep, profound sadness that seemed to have no bottom. "I'm not what you think I am," James said quietly, his voice rough like he didn't use it much. "I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. And I don't blame you for being concerned. You're good parents. Protective. Vigilant. That's exactly what you should be." "That's not an answer," Sarah said firmly. "We need to know why you're watching our children." James looked at each of them, then down at Cooper, who gazed back at him with an expression that seemed almost encouraging. James took a deep breath, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Slowly," Marcus warned, his body tensing, ready to react. But James only pulled out the worn leather journal they'd all seen him writing in, along with a handful of photographs. He held them out, not as a threat, but as an offering. An explanation. "My name is James Mitchell," he began, and his voice cracked slightly on his own name, like he hadn't introduced himself to anyone in a very long time. "And for the past 6 months, Cooper and I have been coming to this park for a very specific reason. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I was absolutely certain it was working." "Certain what was working?" Emma demanded, though something about the rawness in his voice made her anger waver slightly. "I've been identifying children," James said, and the group tensed at those words. He continued quickly, "Children who are struggling. Who show signs of anxiety, autism spectrum behaviors, trauma, social withdrawal. Children who are suffering in ways their parents might not fully recognize yet. Children who are alone even when they're surrounded by others." The group exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't what they'd expected him to say. James opened his journal, revealing pages of handwritten notes. Dates, times, behavioral observations written in careful, precise handwriting. Cooper isn't just a pet. He's a certified therapy dog, trained through the Cascade Therapy Animal Program in Seattle. And for 6 months, we've been conducting an unofficial study. One that I know I should have gotten permission for. One that I know looks suspicious as hell from the outside. He looked directly at Emma. Your daughter is Lily, right? Emma's protective instincts flared immediately. Don't you dare. 6 weeks ago, James interrupted gently, Lily came to this park and sat on that bench for an hour and 17 minutes without speaking a single word. Not to you. Not to any other children. She watched them play but made no move to join them. She exhibited classic signs of selective mutism or severe social anxiety, possibly triggered by a traumatic event. Emma's breath caught. How did he know about the divorce? How did he know Lily had stopped talking? James continued, his voice soft but steady. 3 weeks ago, Cooper and I started our intervention. Nothing forceful. Nothing scary. Cooper simply accidentally dropped his ball near Lily's feet. She picked it up. Handed it back. And for the first time in my observation period, she smiled. Emma's hand went to her mouth. She remembered that day. Remembered Lily coming home and mentioning the nice doggy at the park. It was the first time in months Lily had initiated a conversation about anything. Last week, James went on, Lily asked what Cooper's name was. Yesterday, she played with 2 other children for approximately 23 minutes. It was the first peer interaction I've documented since I began observations. Tears filled Emma's eyes because it was true. All of it. Lily had come home yesterday chattering about the friends she'd made, about the game they'd played, and Emma had cried in the kitchen afterward because she'd thought her daughter was lost forever to the silence. But how? Emma whispered. How did you know to? James looked at the others in the group. Tyler Brooks, he said, and Rachel gasped because that was her son's name. Sensory processing disorder, possibly dyspraxia affecting his motor planning and coordination. 4 weeks ago, he attempted the monkey bars 11 times and failed each time. Other children stopped including him in their games. 2 weeks ago, Cooper started sitting beneath the jungle gym during Tyler's attempts. Your son began talking to Cooper, explaining what he was trying to do. Last week, he successfully crossed the monkey bars for the first time, and I watched him tell Cooper all about it. Yesterday, 3 other children asked Tyler to play basketball with them. Rachel was crying now too, because Tyler had been coming home different lately. Happier. More confident. His occupational therapist had even commented on his improvement. Mia Johnson, James said, looking toward the grandmother who stood frozen near the swings. Hasn't spoken since her mother died 8 months ago in a car accident. Has been exhibiting signs of childhood traumatic grief and possible PTSD. But 4 days ago, I watched her whisper to Cooper for almost 10 minutes. She told him about her mom. She told him she missed her. And then she cried while Cooper just sat with her, and that was the first time I've observed her processing her grief in a healthy way. The grandmother's hands covered her face as she sobbed. She'd been so worried about Mia, so terrified that her granddaughter's silence would become permanent. Marcus's aggressive stance had softened. I don't understand. Why? Why would you do this? What do you get out of it? And that's when James's composure finally cracked. His hands trembled as he pulled out one more photograph from his pocket. This one older, more worn than the others, creased from being held too many times. It showed a young boy, maybe 11 or 12, with James's same blue-gray eyes and a smile that could light up the world. The boy had his arms wrapped around a golden retriever, not Cooper, but similar. This is why, James whispered, his voice breaking completely. This is my son. Daniel. This is Danny. The group went silent, waiting, somehow knowing that whatever came next would explain everything. Danny was diagnosed with severe autism when he was 4 years old, James said, tears streaming down his face now. Nonverbal. Locked in his own world. We tried everything, every therapy, every specialist from California to New York, every medication, every experimental program. Nothing worked. Nothing reached him. And I watched my son suffer every single day, completely unable to help him. Sarah's professional understanding kicked in. As a teacher, she'd worked with autistic children. She knew how devastating it could be for families. We were losing hope, James continued. I was losing my marriage. My wife and I were barely speaking. Danny was 6 years old and had never called me Dad. Had never hugged me. Had never looked me in the eyes. And then... His voice caught. Then we got a golden retriever. The first Cooper. A certified therapy dog. And something impossible happened. He smiled through his tears, lost in the memory. Danny connected with that dog in ways he'd never connected with any human being. Within 6 months, my son spoke his first sentence in 4 years. He looked at me, and he looked at Cooper, and he said, "Cooper is my best friend." And I. James couldn't continue for a moment, overcome by emotion. Cooper leaned against his leg, offering silent support. We had 3 incredible years after that, James finally managed. Danny started school. He made friends. He laughed. He played. He told me he loved me every single night before bed. All because one therapy dog could reach him when the rest of the world couldn't. That's beautiful, Emma said softly, though something about James's use of past tense made her heart sink. So this Cooper is trained the same way? Yes, James nodded. But that's not the whole truth. Because there's a reason I made this my mission. A reason I can't stop. A reason I document every single success, every single breakthrough, every single moment these children start to heal. He looked at all of them, his eyes hollow with grief that had no end. What reason? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew. James's next words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of sorrow through every person listening. Because 2 years ago, we lost Danny to leukemia. He was 12 years old. And the night before he died. But James couldn't finish. His voice failed him completely. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs he'd clearly been holding back for far too long. And that's where we have to pause this chapter, because what James was about to reveal, what Danny said to his father on his deathbed, would change not just these parents' understanding of what was happening at this park, but would eventually change thousands of lives across the entire country. What promise did a dying 12-year-old boy make his father keep? And what does it have to do with every lonely child in America? The answer will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity at the same time. The silence that hung over Riverside Park in that moment was the kind that happens when the world holds its breath. The usual sounds, children playing, basketballs bouncing, distant traffic, all seemed to fade into nothing as everyone waited for James Mitchell to compose himself enough to continue. Cooper remained pressed against his leg, the golden retriever's presence the only thing keeping James tethered to the present moment. Emma was the first to move. The nurse in her recognized someone drowning in grief, and despite her earlier suspicions, despite the fear that had brought her here ready to call the police, she sat down on the bench beside James. Not too close. Not invading his space. Just close enough to be present. "Take your time," she said softly. James wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, took a shuddering breath, and looked down at the photograph of Danny still clutched in his trembling fingers. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of that moment, every word landed with perfect clarity. "The night before Danny died, he was so weak he could barely lift his head off the pillow," James began, his eyes distant, lost in a memory that clearly played behind his eyes every single day. The cancer had spread everywhere. The doctors said it was just a matter of hours. My wife, ex-wife now, she couldn't be in the room anymore. The grief was too much. So it was just me and Danny and Cooper, our original Cooper, lying at the foot of the hospital bed. Marcus had moved closer now, his defensive posture completely gone. Rachel stood with her hand over her heart. Sarah's professional composure had cracked, tears streaming silently down her face. Other parents who had gathered at a distance began moving closer, drawn by the raw honesty of James's pain. Danny could barely speak, but he grabbed my hand with what little strength he had left, James continued. And he looked at me with those eyes, God, those beautiful eyes, and he said, "Dad, I need you to promise me something." James's voice broke again, but he pushed through. I told him I'd promise him anything. Anything in the world. And you know what my 12-year-old son said to me while he was dying? No one dared to speak. No one even seemed to breathe. He said, "There are other kids out there who feel alone like I did. Kids who are trapped inside themselves and don't know how to get out. Kids who need a Cooper. Promise me you'll find them. Promise me you'll help them. Promise me Cooper will help them feel less alone. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping before she could stop it. Rachel openly wept. Even Marcus, the hardened Marine veteran, had to look away to hide the tears gathering in his eyes. How could I say no? James asked, though the question was rhetorical, asked more to the universe than to anyone present. How could I tell my dying son that I wouldn't honor his last wish? So I promised. I held his hand and I promised him that I would find every lonely kid I could, and I would make sure they had what he had, a Cooper who could reach them when nothing else could. James gestured to the golden retriever beside him. Danny died at 3:47 in the morning. This Cooper, the new Cooper, I got him 8 months later, after I'd nearly drunk myself to death trying to cope with the grief. I had him specially trained through the same Cascade Therapy Animal program in Seattle that trained our original Cooper. Cost me almost everything I had left after the medical bills and the divorce. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except keeping my promise to Danny. So you come here every day at 3:47, Sarah said, understanding flooding her voice. The exact time he died. I spend 1 hour here, every single day, because that's what I promised him, James confirmed. 1 hour a day of helping kids who are struggling. Kids who are lonely. Kids who are trapped inside themselves the way Danny was before Cooper saved him. And I document everything because... He held up the leather journal. Because I'm building something bigger than just me and one dog at one park. What do you mean? Emma asked. James pulled out his phone, his hand still shaking slightly, and opened a folder filled with documents, blueprints, legal papers, funding proposals. I'm starting a foundation. Daniel's Hope Foundation. The goal is to train therapy dogs specifically for children with special needs, autism, anxiety disorders, trauma, selective mutism, all of it, and place them not just in clinical settings but in everyday places. Parks, schools, libraries, community centers, places where struggling kids actually exist in their daily lives. He scrolled through images of architectural plans. I've been working with Dr. Patricia Hayes, a child psychologist at Oregon Health and Science University, to develop proper protocols. We've been consulting with therapy animal trainers across the country. We have veterinary behaviorists on board, educational specialists, trauma counselors. This isn't just me being a grieving dad doing something reckless. This is a legitimate program. Marcus leaned in to look at the phone screen. The documents were real, professional, comprehensive. This is incredible, he said. But why the secrecy? Why not just tell people what you were doing? Because I needed proof it actually works, James explained. I needed documented evidence that this intervention model, placing therapy dogs in public spaces where at-risk children naturally congregate, actually produces measurable improvements in their psychological and social functioning. No one is going to invest in this foundation. No school district is going to allow therapy dogs on campus. No park system is going to partner with us unless I can show them real results. Not just anecdotal feel-good stories, but actual data. He opened his journal and showed them pages of meticulous observations. Every child Cooper has interacted with, I've documented their baseline behaviors and tracked changes over time. Mia went from zero verbal communication to whispering to Cooper to, as of yesterday, speaking 3 full sentences to her grandmother. Tyler went from complete social isolation and 11 consecutive failures at a motor task to successful completion and peer integration. Lily went from selective mutism and 0 peer interaction to initiated conversation and cooperative play. Sarah, with her teacher's understanding of child development, was nodding as she read the notes. This is legitimate clinical observation. You've created detailed behavioral baselines and tracked interventions. I had to, James said. Because Danny's dream deserves to be taken seriously. This can't just be some sad dad's pet project that falls apart after a few months. This needs to be sustainable, scalable, something that can help thousands of kids across the country, maybe eventually across the world. Every lonely child deserves what Danny had. They deserve a chance to be reached when everything else has failed. Emma looked at James with completely different eyes now. We thought you were. She couldn't even finish the sentence, ashamed of what they'd suspected. A predator, James finished for her, without bitterness. I know. And you were right to be suspicious. You were being good parents. Protective. Vigilant. That's exactly what these kids need. Adults who pay attention, who notice when something seems off, who are willing to confront difficult situations to keep children safe. He managed a small, sad smile. Honestly, I'm glad you confronted me. It means you're the kind of parents who would notice if your kids were actually in danger. But you're not a danger, Rachel said, wiping her eyes. You're a miracle. I'm just a dad keeping a promise, James replied quietly. Nothing more. But Emma was looking at the journal again, at the meticulous notes and observations, at the care and precision James had put into documenting every interaction. Something didn't quite add up. The level of detail, the clinical language, the sophisticated understanding of childhood psychology and behavioral intervention. This wasn't just a grieving father keeping a promise. James, she said slowly, what did you do before Danny got sick? What was your profession? The question hung in the air, and something flickered across James's face. Something he hadn't shared yet. Another piece of the story that explained so much. Cooper's ears perked up, and the dog turned to look toward the parking lot, his attention suddenly fixed on something the humans hadn't noticed yet. James followed Cooper's gaze, and his expression shifted. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition. Like he'd been expecting someone. That's actually a really important question, James said quietly, standing slowly from the bench. And the answer explains why I knew exactly what signs to look for in these children. Why I understood how to document behavioral changes. Why I knew this intervention model could work. A silver sedan was pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly toward them. But before I answer that, James continued, his voice taking on a new tension, there's something else you need to understand about why I'm doing this. Something about Danny's last hours that I haven't told anyone. Something that changes everything. The sedan parked, and a woman in professional attire stepped out, carrying a briefcase and looking directly at the group gathered around James. That's Dr. Patricia Hayes, James said. The child psychologist I've been working with. She's here because I asked her to come if anyone ever confronted me. Because there's a part of this story that requires a professional to explain. A part about what Danny experienced in his final hours. A part about what he saw that made him so certain this mission would work. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, what he saw? James looked at each of them, his expression grave. What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible. Dr. Hayes has documented it extensively because it falls into an area of pediatric end-of-life research that most people don't know exists. But it explains everything about why Danny was so specific about his final wish. Why he knew with absolute certainty that therapy dogs could reach children that nothing else could touch. Dr. Hayes had reached them now, her expression professional but kind. Mr. Mitchell, she greeted him formally, then looked at the gathered parents. I see the conversation has begun. They deserve to know the whole truth, James said. About Danny's final vision. About what he told me he saw during his last moments of consciousness. About why he knew, that Cooper could save children's lives. The parents looked at each other, confusion and curiosity mixing with the emotional weight of everything they'd already learned. What vision? Sarah asked. What did Danny see? James opened his mouth to answer, but Dr. Hayes held up a hand. Before we discuss Daniel's experience, I need everyone to understand the psychological and neurological context. What happened to Daniel in his final hours has been documented in medical literature, but it's often dismissed or misunderstood. And it's the foundation of everything James is trying to build. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file marked Confidential Patient, Daniel Mitchell. What you're about to hear, Dr. Hayes said carefully, is going to challenge everything you think you know about consciousness, about death, and about why some children, even in their darkest moments, can see truths that adults have forgotten. Cooper moved closer to James, pressing against his leg again, as if the dog somehow knew that the next part of the story would be the hardest to tell. And standing there in the fading afternoon light of Riverside Park, with the sun beginning to dip toward the horizon and the shadows growing longer, James Mitchell prepared to reveal the impossible truth that had driven him for 2 years. The truth about what his dying son had seen. The truth about why Danny had been so certain that Cooper could save lives. The truth that would either make these parents believe in something miraculous, or make them think James Mitchell had lost his mind to grief. Dr. Patricia Hayes was the kind of professional who commanded immediate respect. Mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades studying human behavior in its most vulnerable states. She set her briefcase on the bench and looked at the circle of parents who had gathered around James Mitchell, assessing them with the same careful attention a surgeon might give before making the first incision. "My name is Dr. Patricia Hayes," she began, her voice measured and calm. "I'm a licensed child psychologist specializing in pediatric trauma, end-of-life care, and animal-assisted therapy interventions. I've been working with Mr. Mitchell for the past 18 months on what we're calling the Daniel's Hope Project. And before we go any further, I need everyone here to understand something crucial." She paused, making eye contact with each person. "What you're about to hear regarding Daniel Mitchell's final hours involves a phenomenon that exists in a gray area between neuroscience, psychology, and what some people might call the spiritual or metaphysical. It's been documented in medical literature for decades, but it remains controversial and poorly understood. I'm going to present the facts as they were observed and recorded, and you can draw your own conclusions." Emma felt her pulse quicken. The way Dr. Hayes was framing this, with such careful clinical language, made it clear they were about to hear something extraordinary. "In the 72 hours before Daniel's death," Dr. Hayes continued, opening the file in her hands, "he experienced what's medically termed terminal lucidity, a phenomenon where patients who have been severely cognitively impaired suddenly regain clarity and communicative ability shortly before death. This has been documented in patients with dementia, severe brain injury, and in Daniel's case, advanced neurological involvement from metastatic leukemia." Sarah, the teacher, leaned forward. "I've heard of this. Patients who haven't spoken in years suddenly having coherent conversations right before they die." "Exactly," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "But Daniel's case was extraordinary even within that rare phenomenon. He hadn't been verbal for the previous 6 days due to the progression of his illness. The cancer had affected his brain function significantly. Then, approximately 4 hours before his death, he suddenly became remarkably alert and communicative." James's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. Clearly, reliving this was excruciating. "What did he say?" Marcus asked quietly. Dr. Hayes looked at James, silently asking permission. He nodded, unable to speak. "According to the hospital records and Mr. Mitchell's account, which I documented in detail the following week, Daniel began describing what he called the lonely children," Dr. Hayes said. "He told his father that he could see them. Children all over the world who were trapped inside themselves the way he had been before the therapy dog intervention. He described them with remarkable specificity, their emotional states, their isolation, their suffering." Rachel's eyes widened. "He could see them? Like a vision?" "That's what Daniel reported," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "Now, from a neurological perspective, we could attribute this to hypoxia-induced hallucinations, the brain's response to dying, neurochemical changes in his final hours. But what made Daniel's experience noteworthy was the specificity and the consistency of what he described." She pulled out a document from the file. "This is a transcript of what Daniel said, recorded by Mr. Mitchell on his phone at 11:43 p.m., approximately 4 hours before Daniel's death. With the family's permission, I've used this as part of my research into end-of-life cognition in pediatric patients." Dr. Hayes began reading, and James closed his eyes, clearly hearing his son's voice in every word. "Dad, there are so many of them. So many lonely kids. I can see a girl with blonde hair who sits on swings but never swings. She's thinking about her mom who died. She's so sad, Dad. And there's a boy with red hair who can't make his body do what his brain wants. The other kids don't understand him. He feels broken." Those were Daniel's exact words. Emma gasped. "That's Mia. That's Tyler." He described them. 2 years before James ever came to this park, Dr. Hayes confirmed. 2 years before any of you brought your children here. Daniel described children he had never met, in places he had never been, with specific details about their psychological states. The group stood in stunned silence. The rational explanations, coincidence, lucky guesses, grief-induced misremembering, seemed to dissolve against the specificity of what Dr. Hayes was describing. "There's more," Dr. Hayes continued. "Daniel told his father, Cooper can find them. Dogs can see the lonely hearts that people miss. Cooper will know which kids need help. You have to let Cooper help them, Dad. You have to find them and let Cooper show them they're not alone. James's voice was rough when he finally spoke. He was so certain. Even as he was dying, even as he could barely breathe, he kept saying, "Promise me, Dad. Promise me you'll let Cooper help them." Over and over until I promised. "And that's why you come here," Sarah said, understanding flooding her voice. "You're following what Danny saw." "I know how it sounds," James said, opening his eyes. "I know it sounds like a grieving father who's built a delusion around his dead son's final hallucinations. Believe me, I've questioned my own sanity every single day for 2 years. But then Cooper found Mia. A blonde girl sitting alone on swings, grieving her dead mother. And Cooper found Tyler. A red-haired boy with motor coordination issues who felt broken. Exactly as Danny described. How is that possible?" Marcus asked, though his skeptical Marine training was clearly warring with what he was hearing. "That's the question I've been researching," Dr. Hayes said. "And here's what I've found. There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that therapy animals, particularly dogs, have the ability to detect psychological distress in ways we don't fully understand. They can sense cortisol levels, read micro-expressions, detect changes in human scent associated with anxiety and depression. What Daniel might have been describing, in the metaphorical language of a dying 12-year-old, was Cooper's actual ability to identify children in psychological distress." "So you think Danny somehow knew that Cooper could do this?" Emma asked. "I think Daniel, in his final hours, had a profound insight, whether you want to call it a vision, a neurological phenomenon, or a dying child's deep understanding of his own experience," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "He knew that he had been one of those lonely children trapped inside himself. He knew that a therapy dog had reached him when nothing else could. And he extrapolated that other children everywhere were experiencing similar isolation and could be helped the same way." She closed the file. Whether Daniel literally saw these specific children or whether he understood a universal truth about childhood suffering and animal-assisted intervention doesn't actually matter. What matters is that his insight was correct. Cooper can identify struggling children. The intervention model works. And James has spent 2 years proving it. Rachel was crying again. "Your son saved my son. A boy he never met. A boy he saw somehow from a hospital bed 2 years ago." "Or Tyler was exactly the kind of child Danny had been," Dr. Hayes offered gently, and James recognized the signs because he'd lived through them with his own son. Either explanation leads to the same result, children being helped. But Emma was studying James's face, seeing something else there. Some piece of the story still missing. "There's more, isn't there? Something you still haven't told us." James exchanged a long look with Dr. Hayes. The psychologist gave a slight nod. "Yes," James admitted quietly. "There's one more thing Danny said in those final hours. Something that I didn't include in Dr. Hayes's research. Something I haven't told anyone because it sounds absolutely insane." The air seemed to thicken with tension. "What did he say?" Sarah asked. James's hands were shaking again. At 3:30 a.m., about 17 minutes before he died, Danny suddenly grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. He looked directly at me, more alert than he'd been in days, and he said something that's haunted me every single day since. Cooper whined softly, pressing harder against James's leg. He said, "Dad, the lonely children aren't the only ones who need saving. There are the forgotten ones too. The ones everyone gave up on. The ones people are scared of. Cooper has to help them too, but that part comes later. That part comes after you prove the lonely children can be saved. That part is harder. That part is dangerous." A chill ran through the group. The park seemed to grow quieter, the shadows longer. What did he mean? Marcus asked. "Forgotten ones? People are scared of." "I don't know," James said, and for the first time, fear was evident in his voice. "I've spent 2 years focused on the first part of Danny's message, helping the lonely children, building the foundation, proving the model works. But I've always known there was a second part, a harder part, a dangerous part." Dr. Hayes's expression was grave. 3 weeks ago, something happened that suggests we're approaching that second phase." "What happened?" Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. James pulled out his phone again, scrolling to a series of photographs. A new child started coming to the park. A boy, maybe 13 years old. He comes alone, always wears a black hoodie, sits away from everyone else. He doesn't play, doesn't interact, just sits and watches with this expression that's... James struggled to find words. It's not loneliness. It's something darker. Something that makes my instincts scream danger. He showed them the photos. A teenage boy, face partially obscured by the hood, sitting on the far edge of the park. Even in the photographs, there was something unsettling about his posture, his isolation, the intensity of his gaze. Cooper's reaction to this boy is completely different from how he responds to the other children, James continued. With Mia, Tyler, Lily, Cooper approaches with gentleness, offering comfort. But with this boy, Cooper becomes alert, protective, almost afraid. Have you tried to approach him? Sarah asked. Once, James said. 5 days ago. The boy looked at me, and I swear to God, it was like looking into an abyss. He said one sentence, "Your son sent you for the lonely ones." But I'm not lonely. I'm something else. And then he walked away. The group stood frozen. How did he know about Danny? Rachel whispered. I have no idea, James said. I've never seen him before. Never spoken to him except that one time. But he knew. Somehow he knew. Dr. Hayes opened her briefcase again, pulling out a different file. Which brings us to why I really came here today. Because that boy, his name is Marcus Cole. He's 13 years old. And as of this morning, he's been reported missing by his foster family. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Missing. Emma said. For how long? 72 hours, Dr. Hayes said. And according to the police report before he disappeared, he told his foster mother one thing: I'm going to find the man with the dog who helps broken kids. Because I'm not broken. I'm dangerous. James's face had gone pale. Danny said this part would be dangerous. There's something else, Dr. Hayes said quietly, and her professional composure finally cracked slightly, revealing genuine concern. Marcus Cole's psychological profile. His history. What he's been through and what he's capable of. It's beyond anything this program was designed to handle. What do you mean? Marcus Thompson asked. Dr. Hayes looked at each of them, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone's blood run cold. Marcus Cole has been in 7 foster homes in 3 years. He's been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, conduct disorder, and possible emerging antisocial personality traits. He's been involved in incidents of animal cruelty, fire setting, and violence toward other children. And 3 months ago, he was removed from his last placement after his foster family's dog disappeared and was found. She couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Oh my God, Emma breathed. Danny said Cooper would have to help the forgotten ones, James said, his voice hollow. The ones everyone gave up on. The ones people are scared of. I think Marcus Cole is one of them. And I think he's coming here. To this park. Looking for me and Cooper. When? Sarah asked. James looked at his watch. Then at the lengthening shadows. Then at the parking lot entrance. Based on the pattern of when he's been showing up, James said quietly, any minute now. And as if summoned by the words themselves, a figure appeared at the edge of the park. A teenage boy in a black hoodie, hands in his pockets, walking with deliberate slowness toward the playground. Toward them. Cooper's entire body went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest, the first sound of aggression any of them had ever heard from the gentle therapy dog. The boy stopped about 50 feet away, pulled back his hood, and looked directly at James with eyes that held something no 13-year-old's eyes should contain. And he smiled. Hello, Mr. Mitchell, the boy called out, his voice carrying across the park with eerie clarity. Your son told you I was coming, didn't he? The dangerous one. The forgotten one. The one even a miracle dog can't save. He took another step closer. But here's what your dead son didn't tell you, Marcus Cole said, and his smile widened into something terrible. I don't want to be saved. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The typical sounds of Riverside Park, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic squeak of swings, the rustle of autumn leaves, All faded into a heavy silence as Marcus Cole stood 50 feet away, his dark eyes fixed on James Mitchell with an intensity that made the air itself feel dangerous. Emma instinctively moved closer to where Lily was playing, her maternal instinct screaming at her to put distance between her daughter and this troubled boy. Rachel did the same, positioning herself between Marcus Cole and the playground. Marcus Thompson, the Marine veteran, shifted his weight forward slightly, his body language unconsciously moving into a protective stance. But James Mitchell didn't move. He stood perfectly still, one hand resting gently on Cooper's head, feeling the tension vibrating through the dog's body. Cooper had never reacted this way to any child in 6 months of therapy work. The growl rumbling in the golden retriever's chest was low and continuous, a warning James had never heard from him before. "It's okay, Coop," James said softly, though his eyes never left Marcus Cole. "Easy, boy." Dr. Hayes had her phone in her hand, clearly debating whether to call the police. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, "given Marcus's history and the fact that he's been reported missing, we should contact the authorities immediately." "Wait," James said, his voice calm but firm. "Just wait." "James, this boy is potentially dangerous," Dr. Hayes insisted, her professional assessment overriding her usual deference to James's instincts. "His psychological profile indicates—" "I know what his profile indicates," James interrupted gently. "But Danny said the forgotten ones would come. He said they'd be the ones everyone gave up on. The ones people are scared of. And he said Cooper would have to help them too." "Some children are beyond help," Dr. Hayes said quietly, sadly. "You know that as well as I do." "No," James said, and there was steel in his voice now. "No child is beyond help. That's exactly the kind of thinking Danny wanted me to fight against." Marcus Cole had been watching this exchange with an expression that flickered between amusement and something darker. Now he took another step closer, his hands still buried in the pockets of his black hoodie. "You should listen to the doctor, Mr. Mitchell," the boy said, his voice carrying that same eerie maturity that didn't match his 13 years. "I've read my own file. I know what I am. Reactive attachment disorder. Conduct disorder. Emerging antisocial traits. That's the professional way of saying I'm broken in ways that don't get fixed." "You're not broken," James said, and his voice was stronger now. "You're hurting." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you've been in 7 foster homes in 3 years," James said, and he began walking slowly toward Marcus, ignoring Dr. Hayes's sharp intake of breath. "I know that means 7 families tried and gave up. 7 times you hoped for stability and safety and belonging, and 7 times you were rejected." Marcus's expression flickered, just for a second. "I know that the behaviors in your file, the acting out, the violence, the cruelty, those are symptoms, not the disease," James continued, taking another careful step. "The disease is abandonment. Betrayal. Trauma so deep you can't even remember what it feels like to trust anyone." "Stop," Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "I know that you've learned it's safer to be feared than to be vulnerable," James pressed on, his voice gentle now. "Because every time you've been vulnerable, every time you've let yourself hope that maybe this family would be different, maybe these people would actually keep you, you got hurt. So you hurt first. You push people away before they can leave you." I said stop. Marcus's voice cracked, and suddenly he looked less like a dangerous teenager and more like a frightened child. James was only 20 feet away now. Cooper had stopped growling, though the dog remained tense and alert. "I know," James said softly, "because my son was just like you before Cooper reached him." "Your son had autism," Marcus shot back. "That's medical. That's not his fault. What I am, what I've done, that's different." "Is it?" James asked. "Danny was trapped inside himself because of neurology. You're trapped inside yourself because of trauma. But you're both trapped. Both isolated. Both convinced that no one can reach you. Both certain you're better off alone." Marcus's hands came out of his pockets, and Emma gasped because the boy's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "You don't understand. I've hurt people. I've hurt animals. I've done things that—" His voice broke completely. "Your miracle dog can't fix what's wrong with me." "Cooper didn't fix Danny," James said, and he was close enough now that he could see the tears Marcus was fighting to hold back. "Cooper didn't cure his autism or make his struggles disappear. What Cooper did was show Danny that he wasn't alone. That he was worth loving even when he couldn't communicate. That someone saw him, really saw him, when the rest of the world looked away. James stopped about 10 feet from Marcus, giving the boy space but making his presence felt. "You came here looking for me," James said. "Why? If you're so certain you're beyond help, if you really believe you're just broken and dangerous and wrong, why seek out the man with the therapy dog?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," James said gently. "You came because some part of you, buried under all that pain and all those defense mechanisms and all that learned behavior, still hopes. Still wants to believe that maybe, just maybe, you could be one of the children my son saw. One of the ones Cooper could reach." "I told my foster mother's dog," Marcus started, his voice ragged. "I know what you did," James interrupted. "Dr. Hayes told me. And it was terrible. Unforgivable. A sign that you need serious professional help. But it was also a scream. A cry for help from a boy who didn't know any other way to express the pain he was carrying." "That doesn't make it okay," Marcus whispered. "No," James agreed. "It doesn't. Actions have consequences. What you did was cruel and wrong. But that action doesn't define your entire existence. It doesn't mean you're permanently broken. It means you're a traumatized child who needs intensive intervention and support and probably years of therapy." Dr. Hayes had moved closer now, her phone still in her hand but lowered. She was watching the interaction with professional fascination mixed with deep concern. "Marcus," she said gently, "Mr. Mitchell is right that you're not beyond help. But he's also not equipped to provide the kind of help you need. You require residential treatment, specialized therapy, possibly medication. What James offers here, it's beautiful, and it works for children with certain types of struggles. But your needs are more complex." "See," Marcus said to James, gesturing at Dr. Hayes. "Even she knows I'm a lost cause." "That's not what she said," James countered. "She said you need more help than I alone can provide. And she's absolutely right. But that doesn't mean Cooper can't be part of your healing. It just means your journey is going to be longer and harder than Mia's or Tyler's or Lily's." Cooper made a small sound, and James looked down at his dog. The golden retriever was no longer tense. Instead, Cooper was watching Marcus with that same gentle, knowing expression he'd shown with every other struggling child. Something had shifted in the dog's assessment. "Cooper sees something in you," James said, watching his dog carefully. "Something beyond the fear and the anger and the learned behaviors. He sees the hurt underneath." "Dogs can sense things we miss," Dr. Hayes added, her clinical training warring with what she was observing. "Their ability to read emotional states, to detect distress, to respond to vulnerability, it's remarkable." Marcus was trembling now, his whole body shaking with the effort of holding back whatever was trying to break through. "I don't want to hurt anyone else," he whispered, and the raw pain in his voice was devastating. "I don't want to be the monster in my own file. But I don't know how to be anything else." "That's why you came here," James said. "Because Danny saw you. 2 years ago, dying in a hospital bed, my son somehow knew there would be boys like you. Forgotten. Feared. Written off. And he knew they'd need help too. Different help. Harder help. But help nonetheless." James slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to a less threatening height. "I can't fix you, Marcus. I can't erase what you've been through or undo what you've done. But I can offer you the same thing Cooper offered Danny. The same thing he's offered every child in this park. A starting point. One person, or in this case, one dog, who looks at you and doesn't see a case file or a diagnosis or a list of behavioral problems. Who just sees a kid who's hurting." "And then what?" Marcus asked, tears streaming down his face now. "Even if your dog doesn't hate me, even if you don't call the cops right now, I'm still going back to the system. Another placement. Another family that'll give up on me eventually. What's the point?" Dr. Hayes and James exchanged a long look. Something unspoken passed between them. What if there was another option? Dr. Hayes said carefully. "Something we've been developing as an extension of the Daniels Hope Foundation. Something designed specifically for high-risk youth who need more intensive intervention." Marcus looked at her suspiciously. "What kind of option?" "A residential program," Dr. Hayes explained. combining traditional therapy with animal-assisted intervention. Small group setting, highly trained staff, long-term placement stability. It's still in development, not even close to being operational yet, but you could be our test case, James finished. Our proof of concept that Danny's vision extends beyond just the lonely children. That even the forgotten ones, the scary ones, the ones everyone else has given up on, they can be reached too. Marcus stared at them both, hope and fear warring on his young face. Why would you do that? Why would you take that risk for me? Because my son made me promise, James said simply. And because every child deserves someone who won't give up on them. No matter how hard. No matter how long it takes. No matter how scary the journey gets. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, slowly, tentatively, he took a step forward. Cooper stood up, his tail beginning a gentle, cautious wag. Marcus took another step. Then another. Can I? Marcus's voice was barely audible. Can I meet him? Cooper. Slowly, James said softly. Let him come to you. James gave Cooper a subtle hand signal, and the golden retriever began walking toward Marcus, each step measured and careful. The boy stood frozen, hardly breathing, as the therapy dog approached. Cooper stopped right in front of Marcus, looked up at the troubled teenager with those impossibly gentle brown eyes, and then did something that made everyone watching catch their breath. The dog sat down, lifted his right paw, and offered it to Marcus Cole. The same gesture Danny had taught their original Cooper years ago. The gesture that meant, I see you. I'm here. You're not alone. Marcus's face crumpled completely. He dropped to his knees, and Cooper moved closer, pressing his golden head against the sobbing boy's chest. I'm sorry, Marcus choked out, his arms wrapping around the dog. I'm so sorry for what I did. I'm so sorry. I don't want to be this person. I don't want to hurt anyone anymore. I just want. I know, James said gently, moving closer. I know what you want. The same thing every child wants. To belong. To be seen. To be loved even when you're at your worst. And you can have that, Marcus. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. But you can have it. Emma was crying openly now. So was Rachel. Even Marcus Thompson had to wipe his eyes. They were witnessing something impossible. A boy who everyone had labeled dangerous, who had committed terrible acts, who had been written off by the system, breaking open and allowing himself to be vulnerable. Dr. Hayes was documenting everything on her phone, her professional mind already racing through protocols and possibilities. But then Cooper suddenly lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward the parking lot. The dog's body went rigid again, not with aggression but with alert attention. James looked up and saw what Cooper had heard. 3 police cars were pulling into the parking lot, lights flashing. Someone must have called about Marcus, Dr. Hayes said quietly. The boy immediately tensed, starting to pull away from Cooper, his walls slamming back up. They're here for me. They're going to arrest me. We won't let them take you without a fight, James promised. Dr. Hayes and I will explain everything. We'll advocate for the residential program instead of juvenile detention. But as the police officers emerged from their vehicles, James realized something was wrong. There were too many of them. And they weren't looking at Marcus. They were looking at James. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes, walked directly toward them, her expression grave. James Mitchell? She asked. Yes, James said, standing slowly, confused. What's this about? The sergeant glanced at Marcus, then at Dr. Hayes, then back to James. Sir, I need you to come with us. There's been a situation. What kind of situation? James asked, dread beginning to pool in his stomach. The sergeant's expression softened with something like pity. Sir, there's been an incident at Daniel's Hope Foundation offices. A break-in. Vandalism. And... She paused. Someone left a message. Spray-painted on the wall. It says, "The devil doesn't want these children saved. This is your only warning." The world seemed to tilt sideways. That's not all, the sergeant continued. We found evidence that whoever did this has been watching you. Photographs of you at this park. Of Cooper. Of the children you've been working with. And there's a list, Mr. Mitchell. A list with names on it. What names? James whispered, though he already knew. Mia Johnson. Tyler Brooks. Lily Rodriguez. Marcus Cole. The sergeant's voice was grim. Someone knows exactly which children you've been helping. And based on the threats written with that list, I think someone wants to stop you. The sergeant's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone wanted to destroy everything James had built in Danny's memory. The list of children's names, innocent children who had finally found hope, now read like a target list in the hands of someone who saw Daniel's Hope Foundation not as a miracle but as a threat. James felt his legs weaken. Emma gasped, immediately thinking of Lily. Rachel pulled out her phone, presumably to call her husband about Tyler. Marcus Thompson's face hardened with the expression of a man calculating tactical responses to danger. But it was Marcus Cole, the troubled 13-year-old still kneeling with his arms around Cooper, who spoke first. "This is because of me," the boy said, his voice flat and dead. "I'm the dangerous one. I'm the one who brought this darkness here." "No," James said firmly, finding his voice. "This is not your fault, Marcus. This is someone who's afraid of what we're doing here." The sergeant pulled James aside, her voice low and urgent. "Mr. Mitchell, we have reason to believe the perpetrator is your ex-wife, Catherine Mitchell. She was captured on surveillance footage near your foundation offices. We've been trying to locate her for the past 3 hours." James's world tilted. Catherine. Danny's mother. The woman who had begged him to let their son's death be an ending, not a beginning. Who had pleaded with him to grieve privately instead of building a foundation. Who had accused him of turning their son's suffering into a public spectacle for his own redemption. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have let Danny rest, James. Instead, you turned him into a symbol. This ends tonight." Before James could respond, Dr. Hayes' phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her face went pale. That was hospital security. Catherine Mitchell just tried to access the pediatric wing. She was asking about therapy dog protocols and visiting hours. Security escorted her out, but she was agitated, talking about stopping the cycle and protecting children from false hope. Emma stepped forward, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "She's having a psychological break. Complicated grief, probably PTSD from losing Danny. She's not thinking rationally." "Rational or not, she's a threat," the sergeant said. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to bring her in before someone gets hurt." James looked down at Cooper, then at the circle of parents and children who had become part of Danny's vision. Marcus Cole was still on his knees, trembling, looking like he might bolt at any moment. Mia stood with her grandmother, finally speaking after months of silence. Tyler was with his mother, the confidence Cooper had helped him build still fragile and new. Lily clung to Emma, her recent breakthroughs in communication still tentative. These children. These precious, struggling, healing children. Danny had seen them. And Catherine wanted to destroy what was saving them because she couldn't separate the foundation from her grief. "I know where she is," James said quietly. "She'll come here. To this park. To the bench where this all started. She'll come at 3:47, the time Danny died. She always visits his grave at that exact time." "That's in 6 hours," the sergeant said, checking her watch. "We'll set up surveillance, plainclothes officers." "No," James interrupted. "Catherine needs help, not arrest. She needs what these children have been getting, someone to reach her when she's unreachable." Dr. Hayes touched his arm gently. "James, I understand your compassion, but Catherine has made threats. She's vandalized property. She's potentially dangerous." "She's a mother who watched her son die and never recovered," James said. "She's drowning in grief, just like I was. The only difference is I had Danny's mission to save me. She has nothing but anger and pain." Marcus Thompson, the Marine veteran, spoke up. "So what's your play here, Mitchell? We just wait for her to show up." "We show her what Danny's hope actually means," James said, an idea forming. "We show her these children. We let her see that this isn't about parading Danny's suffering. It's about preventing other children from suffering the way he did." Emma's eyes widened with understanding. "We turn this into an intervention. A therapeutic intervention." "Exactly," Dr. Hayes said, her professional mind already working through the approach. If we can get Catherine to actually witness what the Foundation accomplishes, if we can break through her defensive rage to the grief underneath, we might save her the same way we're saving these kids, James finished. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Dr. Hayes contacted a crisis intervention team. The sergeant positioned officers discreetly around the park's perimeter. Emma, Rachel, Sarah, and Marcus Thompson gathered the children and their families, explaining what was about to happen. "We're going to show a hurting woman that hope is real," Emma told Lily. "Just like Cooper showed you." As 3:47 approached, they waited. James sat on the bench with Cooper beside him. The parents stood in a supportive circle nearby. Marcus Cole, who had agreed to stay despite his fear, stood with Dr. Hayes. At exactly 3:47, Catherine Mitchell appeared at the edge of the park. She looked nothing like the woman James had married. Grief had hollowed her out, aged her a decade in 2 years. She carried a container of gasoline and matches, her intention to destroy the bench, the symbol of everything she blamed for her continued pain. But she stopped when she saw them. All of them. Waiting. "Catherine," James said gently, standing slowly. "I know you're hurting." "You don't know anything," she spat, but her voice cracked. "You turned our son's death into a circus. A foundation. A mission. You won't let him rest." "I'm letting him live," James replied. "Through every child Cooper helps. Through every lonely kid who finds connection. Through every forgotten child who discovers they matter." "It's a lie," Catherine screamed. "False hope. These children will suffer anyway. Life will hurt them anyway. You're just delaying the inevitable." "Mrs. Mitchell," a small voice said. Everyone turned. Mia, the little girl who hadn't spoken since her mother's death, stepped forward. "I thought I would be sad forever," Mia said, her voice clear despite her fear. "After my mom died, I forgot how to talk. But Cooper remembered for me. He sat with me until I could remember too." Catherine's hands shook, the gasoline container trembling. Tyler stepped forward next. "I thought I was broken. That my body didn't work right and kids would always laugh at me. But Cooper showed me I could do hard things. And now I have friends." Lily moved closer, holding Emma's hand. "I thought my family was ruined forever. But Cooper helped me remember that love doesn't end just because people separate. My mom still loves me. I can still be happy." Catherine was crying now, the container slipping from her grip. Then Marcus Cole, the forgotten child everyone had feared, stepped forward. "I thought I was a monster. That I'd hurt people forever because that's all I knew. But today, a dog who should have been scared of me offered me his paw instead. Your son saw me 2 years ago. A kid he never met. A scary kid everyone else gave up on. And he wanted me saved anyway." Marcus's voice broke. "Your son's hope isn't false, Mrs. Mitchell. It's the only real thing I've ever felt." Catherine collapsed to her knees, sobbing with a grief so deep it seemed to have no bottom. James moved toward her slowly, Cooper walking beside him. "Danny didn't want you to suffer forever, Catherine," James said gently, kneeling in front of his ex-wife. His last words weren't about building monuments or foundations. They were about love. About connection. About making sure no child feels as alone as he once did. He gestured to the children, to the parents, to the community that had formed around Danny's vision. "This isn't a circus. It's a family. A family of broken people helping other broken people. And there's a place in it for you too. If you'll let there be." Cooper approached Catherine slowly, cautiously. The woman who had once loved the original Cooper, who had watched that first therapy dog save her son, looked into the current Cooper's gentle brown eyes. And something broke open inside her. She reached out with trembling hands, and Cooper pressed his golden head into her palm. "I miss him so much," Catherine whispered. "I miss Danny so much I can't breathe." "I know," James said. "I know. But he's still here. In this work. In these children. In every act of compassion we choose instead of despair." Dr. Hayes moved forward with the crisis team, but their intervention was gentle, supportive. Catherine wasn't arrested. She was helped. Evaluated. Connected with trauma specialists who understood complicated grief. The gasoline was confiscated. The threat ended not with force, but with empathy. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's Hope Foundation didn't just survive, it flourished. The media coverage of the incident brought national attention. Funding poured in. Therapy dog training programs launched in 12 states. The residential facility for high-risk youth like Marcus Cole broke ground in Portland. Catherine began volunteering, channeling her grief into helping other parents who had lost children. She and James would never reconcile as spouses, but they found a new relationship as co-guardians of their son's legacy. Marcus Cole became the foundation's first residential success story, his transformation documented and shared to prove that no child is truly unreachable. And every day at 3:47 p.m., James Mitchell still came to Riverside Park with Cooper. But now he wasn't alone. Now he was surrounded by a community of believers. People who had learned that hope isn't naive, it's the bravest choice we can make. 6 months later, a bronze statue was unveiled at the park. It showed a young boy kneeling beside a golden retriever, the boy's hand extended in friendship, the dog's paw raised to meet it. The plaque read, Daniel Mitchell, 2008 to 2019. Who taught us that love doesn't end with goodbye. It transforms into mission, legacy, and hope. No child walks alone. Because in the end, that's what this story has always been about. Not about one man or one dog or even one extraordinary child. It's about what happens when we choose connection over isolation. When we choose to see the struggling child instead of looking away. When we choose to believe that broken things can heal, that forgotten children can be found, and that hope, real, tangible, transformative hope, is always stronger than despair. Danny saw lonely children and forgotten children because he had been both. He knew what it felt like to be trapped and unreachable. And he knew that sometimes, salvation comes on 4 paws with a gentle heart and patient eyes. That truth changed Mia, Tyler, Lily, and Marcus. It saved Catherine from destroying herself. It gave James a reason to keep living. And it sparked a movement that continues to grow, reaching more children every single day. If this story touched your heart, then you're part of Danny's vision too. You're part of the community that believes no child should suffer alone. Join us. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that goodness still exists in this world. Hit like to honor every Danny, every James, every struggling child who just needs someone to see them. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow's story will be even more powerful, even more true, even more necessary. And tell us in the comments, which part of this journey hit you the hardest? Was it Marcus finding redemption? Catherine finding healing? Or simply the truth that love, real love, never truly ends? We'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep believing. Keep hoping. Keep seeing the invisible children. Because somewhere right now, a lonely child is waiting for their Cooper. And you might be exactly the person who helps them find it.